Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you all to Visual Conference 2024. My name is Damon Suede, and my topic for today is dynamic characters. I am a romance novelist by trade. I come to fiction from film, TV, comics, theater, and I have a sort of a unique approach to character that comes from a background I have in theater, developed in London. I'm a longtime visual novel player, and I got recruited into visual novel scripting by Wolfscade and Bob Conway about 8 months ago for Racy Bar Game. And what I've got for today is I developed a technique, sort of in my showbiz background, for characterization, dramatization. It works in any media, but it's especially powerful for anything that you want to keep interactive and dynamic and engaging. And so I hope that in the next 20 minutes, you will come away with a couple of tricks that will be useful for the projects you're working on. Just in case you are interested, I have already taken your notes for you. There's a website address here, damonsuede.com/VNConf. It has a PDF handout. It also has a bibliography for topics in the class if you want to dig deeper, and a couple of extra exercises if that is interesting to you. What I want to start with is I want to talk about the way writers learn to write characters. Most writers and most books on writing talk about characters in terms of extrapolation. Often we are given a sort of a personal ad. We answer questions and we fill in a bunch of adjectives to tell us what a character is like. And then based on that, we are supposed to extrapolate certain things. So we write down that someone is Korean, or we write down that someone is a Pisces, or we write down that someone is a tenor. And then based on that, we kind of cobble together a sense of character completely based on nouns and adjectives. And the truth is, we don't actually use a lot of that detail. A lot of that is wasted. All of those questionnaires, everything you fill out, I like to call them impersonal ads, because actually all of that adjectival modifier heavy language actually doesn't tell you very much about what a character does. The problem is you wind up wasting 90 to 95% of it. And so what I want to talk about today is something that will keep your work much more efficient. I know in the world of game production, time is short and assets are limited, and anything that saves us time, energy, creativity is a good thing. To start with, what I want to focus on is alignment. I'm a big believer in alignment. I think that alignment is the ways that you make great art. I think it's also the way you keep a project on task, on track. It keeps our efforts efficient and it makes our output effective. And really what it does is it sort of encapsulates what is best and smartest about us as human beings. When I offer you a glass of wine, I don't smash the bottle on the floor and then ask you to lick wine off the broken glass. I pour it into a glass by aligning it, and then you align the glass with your mouth, and then you align the swallow so that it goes down the alignment of your esophagus into your GI tract. And that alignment actually allows access. And it also is better impact-wise because you actually get more wine into yourself. Well, the same is true of anything creative, right? If we align all of the details in a creative project, we're going to maximize things like chemistry and consistency and potency, emotion, intensity, humor, heat, all that stuff, right? The thing is, everything in a game matters. Nothing is random. It's not like you fall down the stairs and a visual novel pops out of you. So we're always looking for something to align our efforts. For my part, I start with something that I picked up from Aristotle. I am a hardcore Aristotelian, and in the Poetics, Aristotle talks about what he calls ethos. This is actually the word that is often translated as character. And when he says ethos, that doesn't refer to a mask or a role or a type of person. It literally translates as habitual action, that which one does habitually. And so a character in the active sense is not a person or even a personality. A character is an action figure. They are a device to extract emotion from an audience, and you use them effectively by letting them do the work of the story. As we always say, actions speak louder than words. And for those of you that think that I'm belaboring a pretty obvious point, I want to play a little game. I want to imagine that we're writing a 20th century protagonist, and this person is short. They're dark haired, they're slight of build because of pretty bad health as a child. This person grows up a devout Christian, they're vegetarian, a non-smoker, they love animals, and they're a natural leader. They're kind of a bossy boots in their life. This person grows up on a small farm. They grow up very blue collar with a Southern accent they keep for their whole life. And they have these rock ribbed traditional values that sort of shore up everything that they ever do, think, and are. Their parents split pretty early. They're raised by a single mom, and they later nurse mom through a bout of pretty awful cancer. This person goes to public school. They drop out at 16, actually, to take care of mom. They wind up working a series of odd jobs in a tense metropolis that's going through a lot of upheaval. Initially, they start out wanting to be an artist, but then over time, they sort of self-educate, and little by little, they fall into political activism. And this person, at the age of 42, winds up assuming this big, splashy public role in a popular uprising. They marry once, they have no children, and they die broke and almost completely alone. And yet, even now, they wind up with a global legacy as a universal political icon of upheaval and transformation. Now, you look at this and you think like, wow, drama, intrigue, there's pathos in here, there's all this great backstory, there's gritty details, there's all these stakes. It looks like a character. This is not a character. This is an impersonal ad. This is a series of nouns and adjectives that trick you into thinking that you're talking about a story. The reason is everything I just told you applies to Rosa Parks and Adolf Hitler. Rosa Parks and Adolf Hitler are not the same person. They do not do the same things, think the same things, act the same way. And so if I provided you this, what I'm providing you is actually nothing. This is parsley. This has nothing to do with the character or the plot that might come out of that character in any game that you could possibly produce. And this is why I always say impersonal ads are a trap. Filling out forms, putting down a list of things like hair color, eye color, weight, job, gender, sexual orientation, any of these things. Yes, it is useful, not at the beginning, because actually a lot of this is decorative. It doesn't actually have to do with the task of telling a story. Now, I believe that all characters are motivated by something problematic, right? A need, a lack, an injury, an absence, a wound, a ghost, something that bugs them, because frankly, life is imperfect and we as human beings struggle with problems. And so what that means is in a story, every character goal is always an intensely personal attempt to fill what I like to call the void. And I like the word void because it's actually neutral. It's culturally neutral as a scientific term. It just means a vacuum that sucks. And just for kicks and ha-has, I'm going to give you a little void recipe, right? So if you wanted to create instant backstory, instant motivation for your character, this is how you do it. Well, you need a problematic emptiness, hunger, injury, or absence. That sucks. You want it to have deep resonance and personal significance for the character. It needs to have an origin situated in the past, so they dwell on it, think about it, it affects them all the time. It's always present in their mind and heart. And this void is going to have a persistent influence on all their emotions, all their schemes, all their actions, right? And of course, it's going to have no serious relief until the story's end, because bottom line, a void always sucks. And I mean sucks in every sense of the word. It sucks in the sense of it's always pulling them backwards like a black hole at the center of their life, but also it sucks just because it's unpleasant, it's nasty. And so the goal is their attempt to plug the hole in their heart with a cork, and the cork takes different shape for different kinds of characters. And we call these things goals, right? So when a character has a void, they try to fill it with some kind of goal that they are convinced will solve all their problems. The thing is, as authors, we tend to get bogged down in what characters are. To be, notoriously, is the most worthless verb, right? When you're writing, saying something is something, was something, it's actually pretty dumb. You're just assuming that existence is going to inspire belief in people. What I'm going to encourage you to do is, instead of obsessing about what your characters are, I'd like you to think about what your characters do. Because when people play a game, they don't play a game to be something. They play a game to do something, choose something, make something, take something, fake something. They do things, and it's the doing where the fun comes in. And this is not a new idea, right? In game design, this is not a new idea. There's a great quote in a book by Chris Crawford called Chris Crawford on Game Design. Chris Crawford started designing games back in the 1980s. He's kind of a legend in the industry. He says in this book, whenever we make a choice, we are choosing between verbs. We're not choosing between the lady and the tiger. We're choosing to fight or to flee, to kiss or to slap, right? There's in this book, in Chris Crawford on Game Design, there is lesson 26. And lesson 26 actually is a great title. And I think about it every day when I'm writing. The title of the lesson is, It's the Verbs, Stupid. When Chris Crawford is planning a game, he literally makes a list of verbs, because verbs are the only interesting thing in a game. Verbs are what people buy when they buy a game, and the verbs are what is going to happen in the game. And so by focusing on the actual active part of language, Chris Crawford is saying unlock the potential so that interactivity is more likely, right? And this, of course, has enormous implications for any writing. And I mean fiction, film, comics, you name it, right? But for our purposes, for visual novels, action is where we get the roots of interaction, right? A story is built of action the way a pig is made of pork, the way fire is made of flame. A character is just an arc of transformation revealed by high stakes choices. Now, Alaric is going to be teaching a class on choices later. And in a sense, that's the core of all interactivity, right? This or that. These three things, pick one. Games make us choose between different actions. So if I'm writing something, I don't want to get bogged down in things like hair color or weight or history or politics, because that's actually not what the character's going to do. Right? Surfaces are a trap, because I can write a really like racy erotic thriller about it for Idris Elba to star in, and it's going to wind up a cartoon about a talking squirrel starring Betty White. As an author, as a screenwriter, I have no control over that, right? That's the producer's job. And in a game, I can't rely on the art to do the heavy lifting that my writing isn't doing. And so when I'm starting any project in any media, the first thing I do is I cast verbs. And I mean literally, I pick a single transitive verb for each character, and that action, that core verb, is going to define everything they do and are for the entire story, every time they appear on page. The classic example, the example I always use because it's super clear and most people know it, is Snape, right? Severus Snape in the Harry Potter books. In those 7 books, Snape is a teacher, and he's a martyr, and he's a bully, and he's a victim, and he's a hero, and he's all sorts of things. He's also dark and brooding and vicious and bullying. He's always kind of taking contradictory positions. And all of those things are sort of true about him, but they're also sort of not true about him because characters are often contradictory. What Snape does all the time, in every scene he appears, is he vexes. Snape's action is to vex, because he vexes Harry, he vexes Dumbledore, he vexes Voldemort, he vexes Draco, he vexes Lily, he vexes James, he vexes his family, he vexes the Order of the Phoenix, he vexes the Death Eaters, he vexes himself. He is so busy vexing that when he dies, his tears vex people. And in case you don't believe me, the word to Snape is a 17th century synonym for vex. In fact, his name means vex severely. And so you may not agree, right? You may not think vex is right. And I'm not suggesting that J.K. Rowling automatically said that, did that. I would argue she did because of the synonym. But you're a writer. And so, of course, as a writer, if you were writing him, you might pick a different action. But the point is, by picking that single action, everything Snape does, says, every piece of clothing he wears, every room he stands in is affected by vexing, because he is vexation in human form, right? And that means if we were putting him in a game, his art, his dialogue, his vibe, his choices, the ornamentation on him, the typeface that you use for him could be informed by that action. And so it would drive the story in a way that just picking a bunch of adjectives never would, right? And so when I'm starting a story, I'm always going to try to identify the unchanging present tense energy of each cast member. By casting characters with a specific verb, I'm forcing them into action on every page. I'm making them do stuff, right? And how do we get the action? Well, we've already set that up, right? Everyone has a void. And so what does the void do? It sucks. And it moves them towards a goal. Well, how do they get from the void to the goal that they hope will fill it? Well, they take action. And so the action is always going to result from their void, and it's always going to move towards their goal. It is aligned. Now, as I'm talking about verbs, I'm going to take a little moment for grammar. I want you to focus on transitive verbs. A transitive verb is a verb which acts upon or interacts with something else. So if I drink water, that's transitive because water is the object. But if I just say, I drink, I'm telling you I am a drunk, right? Drink in that point is intransitive. There is no object in the sentence. Action is what we want because we want the character to engage with the environment, engage with the other cast members. Action is inherently transitive. Activity is intransitive, right? We want our characters to do stuff. We want our readers to feel stuff. Subjects require objects to take action, and so transitivity becomes critical. A transitive is always going to give your character a focus and an impact so that when they're on page, they're doing stuff that matters and they're making people feel. The minute you give a character an intransitive, the character kind of bogs down. They're going to live in the swamp of nothingness. And this is why when you see a character who broods or meddles, it's boring. because you can't brood something unless you're a chicken. You can just stand there brooding. And that's not that interesting, right? You can't play brooding. You want to make your characters do things that matter because you want to move your audience. Move is a transitive, right? Now, some of you may be saying, that's crazy. I don't believe you. It cannot just be one verb for an entire character. And in a way, I sort of agree. This is where we get into what I call tactics. Tactics are aspects of the action. They are reactions that reveal subtext and texture and history of a character. I like to think of them as synonyms plus. They are a synonym plus of the core action, right? It's a temporary reaction to a new conflict or dilemma in a beat. So in a new story moment, if Severus Snape is Vex, in a specific story moment with a specific character who has their own action, he might, in the course of vexing, he might choose to insult or berate or bully, because those are all ways you could vex something. And by creating synonymous tactics, what you do is you make sure that each beat of the story aligns. And this becomes pretty powerful because tactics can, of course, be internal and external, which allows you to increase depth and breadth inside your characters. And it also allows you to show change because the character's action never changes. Characters always act like who they are, right? The action is eternal, but the tactic changes, right? That actually follows Aristotle, habitual action. Because it is that which one does habitually, the action does not change, the tactics do. I'll also, as a tip, say, let some tactics fail, right? Everything can't succeed all the time. Everything can't fail all the time. Success sucks. Angst tanks. This is why Mary Sue's are pretty awful as game characters. This is also why sad sacks are terrible. If everything is already predetermined, if success or failure is already baked in, who gives a what? Energy never exists in stasis. Nobody wants to sit around and do nothing in a game. They want to make choices that matter, right? And so you want your tactics to be specific and interactive and significant to the character. You want them to resonate. And this is actually where things get pretty cool, because if a character is defined by their action, and that action is busted out, broken down in a series of synonymous tactics, then that means every time your character appears on the page, they have a tactic that is going to define the way they behave with other characters in that beat of the story. And that means you could start with the least interesting tactic because you don't want to start out with the big one, and you want to build the climactic tactic. And that means you could just make a list of tactics from least interesting to most interesting, and you just plotted your entire visual novel. In fact, you could plot every ending, every branch, every choice that your character makes meaningfully just by setting up a series of different tactics that result in different outcomes. And this is literally a structure based on nothing but dynamic language, right? Obviously, there's basic things you can do narratively. Escalation is always critical. You want to situate your tactics along a rising arc aimed at a goal. You want to actually allow some maneuver. You want a little digression, right? You want some maneuvers to surprise the reader, to surprise the other characters. You want to deepen things, broaden things. Jackie is going to be teaching a plot class later about promise, progress, and payoffs. And using tactics is a perfect way to maximize player engagement and also the emotional impact, both on your audience and the characters around them in the world, right? Then finally, climax, right? You want to build to whatever the most shocking or pivotal tactic is, because you want to leave them with a bang. You want that big payoff. The word climax actually means ladder or staircase in Greek, right? So you can think of the tactics as rungs on the action ladder. You are building all of those tactics so that the character is always aligned, so that that action is at the core of everything that they do in the course of the game. All a story really is a series of intersecting, escalating actions. And what we find out at the end is, did the actions work or did they not work, right? And we don't want to repeat actions. We don't want to have more than one character in a story having the same action. We want to keep things dynamic. And so what we're looking for is friction. We're looking for a way to keep the characters acting like themselves, but interacting in ways that create a little bit of rub. My mom used to say, friction is what makes fights feel bad and sex feel good. And friction is an energy source, right? Just rubbing two characters together. Inherently, Friction is generated by contrast, and contrast always generates context. And so it's a twofer, because on the one hand, you're creating character relationships that actually have meaningful transformation. But by the same token, every time your characters interact, they're building out the world. They're building out all the things that make your story immersive. And that's powerful. Contrast inherently maximizes emotional legibility. It lets players know where they are in your game and what matters and what doesn't matter and what's important and what's not important. That means when you're casting your visual novel, you want to give your leads actions and, of course, tactics that directly clash. The simplest way to do that is to give them antonyms, right? If you have a character that provokes, then you want to have another character that protects. If you have a character, if you have a love interest that hides, you want their lover to seek. So hide, seek, and demand, defy, and welcome, forbid are great pairings because they create effects on each other. And all relationships are shown by the effects that characters have on each other. And so if there's no effect, there's no relationship. This actually, again, gives you another way to enrich not only characterization, but dramatization, because every kind of interaction, all intercourse between characters is going to reflect that character's action. And I mean the sex they have, the dialogue that they speak, the clothes that they wear, the fights that they have, the places they go and the way they get there. Everything a character does is done by acting. And so this is a way not only to distinguish characters from each other, but also to make what they do feel important and dramatic. As a side tip, if you have an object or a setting and you want to make it feel like a character, easy fix, verbalize it. Give an action to your setting or give an action to an object, and it will feel like it's alive because it acts like a character. And so it's a simple thing to do. The classic example I always use is from Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Manderley's action is to haunt. I actually pulled that verb right out of the text. You can go and find it. And the tactics of Manderley change over the course of the novel. Manderley's tactics become more and more destructive, more and more ominous until that big finale. And so if you have a place or a thing that isn't alive, but you want to make it feel important by verbalizing it, you can get really cool effects. Now, of course, this leads to nifty things for the character itself, because if you have an action and tactics and you have a sense of what the trajectory of the character is, well, you can make every characteristic do heavy lifting, because once you know the action, the tactics of your character, everything is going to make sense. The alignment holds it all together. And so once you know the action, what's their name? How does their name reflect that action and reinforce the things we know about that character and the world, the culture that they inhabit? How about their reputation? How public or private are they about their action and their tactics? How about their occupation? What do they do for a living? What's their employment? What are their hobbies? What are their passions? How do they spend their time? Again, knowing the action and allowing the action to form it means that the character aligns and it feels like a living person, an actual person doing something that matters. What about paradox? What contradiction inside the character impedes their progress and actually reveals their void and points towards potential goals? And then finally, at the very end, at the last thing I want you to do, and this is actually where most character classes start. How tall are they? How old are they? What gender are they? What's their sexual orientation? What race are they? What's their heritage? What are their political beliefs? Where do they go to church or not? What do they wear or not? After you know the action of the character, the tactics of the character, the trajectory of the character, then you go in and you fill in this stuff because now it's meaningful. Now it's actually supporting what you've built, right? Now, here's a bonus. Verbs sell. Literally, if you talk to any professional copywriter, what they're going to tell you is the way sales copy gets written is with transitive verbs. So use the verbalization of your story to amplify all the stuff that makes your game special, the genre, the subgenre, the tropes, all of it. Use them in the logline, in the blurb, in the marketing materials, in the trailer. Everything you do can bake in this sense of action so that the visual novel winds up in the hands of the right players. Yeah? Now, every one of us brings unique skills and strengths and weaknesses and flaws to the table. We are not insects. I want you to learn your strengths and flaws, embrace your distinctive process, because the alignment that I'm talking about, starting from voids to actions to goals, it works in any direction, right? It's almost holographic. If you break a hologram, every piece of the hologram contains the image of the whole, right? And so maybe you're a person that loves backstory and pain. You love this, you love looking at the past and then figuring out how to move forward. Okay, so start with the void and then think from that void, what action would emerge and what goal would that action move the character towards? Maybe you're a person that likes goals. You always want to think about the future, the end game of the story. Well, then work backwards. Figure out where they're headed, then figure out the action that would get them there, and then figure out the void that would motivate that action. For my part, I'm from film and TV, so I'm an action writer. I'm always like present tense. What is happening right now all the time? Well, that's actions. And so I start with the action and I work outwards because it's easy once I know the action to say, like, well, that's in the past, the void that caused it, and that in the future is the goal that we're headed towards. And so no matter who you are as a writer or what your skills are, you can always get where you're going. I will say I wrote a book. If you're interested in this technique, I've written a book that explains stuff. It is sort of jam-packed with ample examples and exercises. I also wrote a big, crazy thesaurus of transitive verbs because it didn't exist. And so my students asked me to write one. So I wrote this 273,000 word thesaurus of transitive actions and tactics for genre stories. But more than anything, the most important slide and the thing that I want to leave you with is thank you. Thank you for taking the time to sit with me and go through this stuff. I really hope you all enjoy the rest of Visual Conference 2024. Please go make great games because I want to play them, and have a fantastic day.